Thanks, David, and good afternoon, everybody. First, I want to thank everybody for being here. I realize your schedules are busy, extremely busy, and I'm glad you're taking the time to join us because we value this feedback and input about our programs. We want to learn what we can do better and what we're doing wrong, and that's where you come in. Let us know if there are areas of confusion that we can straighten out, if there are things we can improve on. We really do rely on this, and we take it very seriously when we're discussing evolution of the programs and any improvements we might make. And as David said, this will be a fairly brief, about 20 minutes or a little less, sort of overview of what's happened at the ABR in the last couple of years. And I'll be talking a little bit about how board certification exams are administered in a remote environment, because for this audience, I think that's front and center of your concerns. Certainly, we had a lot more uncertainty around this a couple of years ago. We're confident that we have a model that works reasonably well, and we're trying to make it better. But before we get to the how of board certification, it's probably important to talk about the why of board certification. And this really gets at the fundamental reason that the ABR exists and what we're trying to do on your behalf and on behalf of the public that we serve or that you serve as physicians. I included our mission statement, and as people on the call are aware, this took a long time. This is about 8 years old now. It took us a full day to develop these 27 words, and it was quite a challenge. The first iteration actually didn't include patients, and we realized after some discussion that if not for the patients, we really wouldn't need to exist, right? We wouldn't need to be good at what we do just for the sake of being good at it. We have to be good at what we do because it serves the public and it serves the patient. So with that as sort of some background, a lot of the things that we do are really, they involve the physicians and in our case, the medical physicists as well, but they're really directed toward goals that are important to the patients. And this is because some professions are different, and we may disagree about the sorts of professions that belong on a list that I'll share in a moment. The professions that share an element of public trust, that is, the public makes some assumptions about the way we train, the way we acquire knowledge, and the way we apply that knowledge. And I would argue that there's a sense of purpose as well, and maybe not altruistic to the point where that consumes us, but I think at the sort of the fundamental level, we're dealing with a profession that overall has both the sense of public trust and a sense of purpose. And there are examples, and I would argue airline pilots probably belong here, military, teachers, lawyers, judges, nurses, and there are others you could add to this list as well, but I would argue that medical professionals belong on this list, that we satisfy sort of those two criteria. And as a result, we are going to hold ourselves to sort of higher expectations. Now, there's a brief history. Actually, I had the opportunity to read about 600 pages on this last year in the history of board certification in the United States. But the kernel of it really is the fact that in the late 1920s and early 1930s, boards were formed because individuals wanted to distinguish themselves, and they were formed by the profession. They weren't formed by consumer groups or politicians. They were formed by the practitioners in the art. And at that point, the art was evolving into specialties. And so you saw ophthalmology actually was the first board, not long after the American Board of Surgery came along. And what they're trying to do is distinguish themselves. So this is the profession itself saying, we're going to define training experience and examination requirements to make us different from other people who would claim to be surgeons, as an example. This second quote is actually from pediatrics, and the same is true in pediatrics, that if you wanted to be a pediatrician, all you had to do was put up a sign that says I'm a pediatrician. And we know, of course, that today that would be unacceptable, right? We're now bound by this sort of interest in serving the public good, but also the good of the professionals to distinguish ourselves as different, distinguish ourselves as diagnostic radiologists, interventional radiologist, medical physicist, or for today's discussion as radiation oncologists. Now, there are mistakes that a medical certification board might make, and one would be to ignore the doctors. And that's a critical piece of the way the board thinks about things now, is to make sure that we're listening That's part of why we're hoping to hear from you today. What could we do differently? I had the opportunity to ask the former president of ABMS about some other things that might be problematic, and she mentioned that, well, don't expect too much of the doctors. That is, the processes themselves shouldn't be onerous. They shouldn't be confusing. They shouldn't be so extensive that they start to interfere with work that we do, or the things we might learn, the things we might seek out, research we might do, et cetera. We really can't be a burden. And I agree with that philosophy. I think that's true. But at the same time, we can't expect too little of ourselves, right? Because if we do, then it's not credible to the public, right? It's got to be reasonably rigorous that having attained board certification, that it means something. Because if it's too easy, anybody could do it, and therefore it's not credible to the public. So what we need to do at the ABR, and I'm just mentioning this, that we are attempting to control costs. The governing board holds me to this at every turn in a very reasonable way. They just say, let's make sure that what we're doing is as much as possible avoiding increases in fees. So we really are stressing that in our day-to-day operations. We're attempting to provide relevance, that is that our exams should reflect what actual practice is and try to steer away from esoteric topics. As I said already, we shouldn't be too demanding. We need high standards, but those processes shouldn't be onerous. And at the same time, we can't be too easy. As far as enhancement of service, this is really about communication. And again, that's part of what we're doing today, is to make sure that you have the opportunity to question what we do and give us that feedback. And we have the obligation to make sure that we're communicating extremely well. And if we're not doing it well enough, we need to do it better. I was asked this question just yesterday from a group of physicians, and it had to do with what evidence is there that board certification matters. This is nearly 20 years old. There have been dozens of papers since that time talking about board certification. I will admit most of these are not in the area of radiation oncology or diagnostic radiology. And the reason is that it's difficult to find a comparison group because most radiation oncologists are board certified. Most diagnostic radiologists are board certified. So a lot of this literature comes from family medicine, internal medicine, that has, I think, more variation in whether or not individuals are board certified. But these are all the sort of the philosophical reasons that one would seek to become board certified, and how does the act of becoming board certified and maintaining that certificate over time, how does that support the ideas of continuous quality improvement, pursuit of excellence, et cetera, the same kinds of things that probably made many of you go into medicine in the first place, is that you are inclined to do those sorts of things, right? To engage in those sorts of behaviors and activities. Daniel Pink summarized it in part of this paragraph, basically saying that, you know, as physicians, we tend to pursue autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That's what kind of drives us and gets that. And of course, that was the topic or the title of his book. And we're connected to a larger purpose. Now, you know, I don't want to dwell on this. We're going to get to the nuts and bolts of the exams here in a moment, but the point is there's a foundation to this. Why do we take this exam? And it's not just to get the next job. It actually means a little bit more than that in the public context and in that social contract that we have with patients that we serve. So with that sort of as background, and I'll just summarize, you know, what we need to do at the ABR is we need to have a rigorous process that is valuable to you and to the public. We need to do it well, because if we don't do it well, the self-regulation idea could be at risk, because the government could step in and do it. And honestly, I'd rather have the profession do it than the government. We should be able to self-govern and be self-regulating, and that's part of how the board functions. And we are attempting to be relevant and reasonable over time, and I hope we've made some strides already, but I will admit we have much more to do in this area. So let me get into the 2021 exams. You know, as many of you know, we delivered twice as many exams in 2021 as we normally would, because it was the holdover from the 2020 exams. And you know, the questions really are, well, why did we make the change? And I think I can go through this pretty quickly. Everyone on this call is likely aware that the pandemic shut things down as far as our exams, hence we couldn't offer exams in 2020. Commercial test centers were closed or had very limited capacity people couldn't travel. There were distancing considerations. But it was the uncertainty about this because no one knew how long the pandemic would go. We still don't know, obviously. But that uncertainty kind of said we need to do something in order to get candidates back on track, let them progress on their path toward board certification. So in the approximately 10 months between late spring of 2020 and early 2021, we developed remote exams, both computer-based and oral exams, so that people could get back on track, because we still don't know what those implications might be with the next Greek letter to surface with the next variant. I get this question a lot, so I just answer it on the slide so that we're clear about this. We did not design the remote exams as a temporary measure. The problem is that we don't know if it will continue to work. So far, it's working extremely well. We don't have security issues. We are confident in the psychometrics as the scoring of the exam, that it's doing about the same thing it did before. We didn't make many changes. We didn't want to change the other variables at the same time we were implementing a new remote exam model. And as a result, I would say it's arguably a conditional success in the sense that we could administer exams, we could confidently award certificates to those who pass, but we still have this in the back of our mind that every exam is a pilot. And it still is for us because we're learning as we go. We want to make it better. I want to make it seamless for the candidates. I want it to be comfortable. I don't want it to be as stressful as it is. And the things we have to do is make it a streamlined process, not something that is complicated in some way or itself anxiety provoking. And that's really part of our goal in making this process even better than it is currently. I won't go through all the parameters. I'm going to jump to the candidate experience. There are other factors that we use when determining what the proper model was, but this idea of candidate experience was critical to me. The models allow for flexibility. You can take breaks basically when you want to, within reason, and far more flexible than it used to be at a test center or in the oral exam environment. We have recovery functions for connection disruptions, that your internet suddenly goes out. We have a way to kind of get that back. We are able to accommodate for disabilities and for nursing mothers much more effectively than we could in the past. So candidate experience was certainly something that we, even though it's low on the list, this was actually what we were after more than anything else, was that candidate experience. We also wanted a process that was valid. So it had to be credible, public. I alluded to this before, because it recognizes that high level of achievement and accomplishment. And all of these involve some trade-offs. But these are the kinds of things that we talked about when we were developing the board certification exams. The location for our exams, I know many of you have not tested yet, or maybe haven't even scheduled to register for one of our exams yet, but the minimum requirements are going to need adequate internet connectivity. It needs to be relatively private, free from interruptions. I use these two examples. If it's acceptable, if you're alone in your home or in an office, unacceptable, you can't take this exam at Starbucks. Even though you might be able to sit there for an hour and a half and no one would bother you, the fact is we need a sort of a private environment. And we have some basic requirements regarding no additional materials, so that we can be sure this is a secure process. Obviously, it's a closed book exam. If you lose the connection during the exam, we get this question a lot, so I included this slide as well. It depends. Most of the outages that we encounter are pretty brief. Individual gets kicked out either because their internet dropped off, or there was a problem with a setting on their computer. Sometimes, many times actually, we can't explain exactly why there was a system problem, but the bottom line is we can not only get you back almost 100% of the time, but we can also give that time back to you. So for the computer-based exams, if you were locked out for 12 minutes, you get 12 minutes back. What this does require, though, is something a little different than the traditional model, and that is that we're going to require that you confirm the answers in blocks, because if you drop out and you're out for a half an hour, we want to be able to get you back into the exam, and we can't reasonably allow candidates to go back and review content that they saw previously, because obviously that sort of blackout period means that there's a security risk. So the bottom line is we deal with these questions in blocks of 20 questions. You answer those 20, now you go on to the next one. And so far, I think it's been reasonably effective. That's the price, unfortunately, you have to pay for not having to travel to a secure exam center. We get this question as well, the technical check in advance. And over here, I just kind of scared you because if you haven't examined yet, you're concerned that, well, wait a minute, what do I do to make sure that my internet's effective, to make sure that the system works on my laptop or my desktop? And we have arranged so that you have multiple opportunities to check and basically try out that device on that network and make sure that it works on a practice environment before you get to the exam itself. The other thing we do is allow you to practice with the user interface. I don't want this to be uncomfortable for you, so that when you get to exam day, the last thing you should have to worry about is, how do I use these image tools? How do I adjust the contrast level or the magnification of an image? How do I navigate to the next question? Those things should all be second nature by the time exam day arrives. And we have multiple self-paced opportunities for you to do that. Because ultimately that's what I want. We don't want that extra variable of, hey, this was stressful, or this was something I hadn't encountered before. You should know what you're going to find the day you get to the exam. And in order to do that, we give people these multiple opportunities in advance. Enhancements that are coming for 2021 and 2022, unrelated directly to exams. As many of you know, we announced a residency leave policy in late June that allows up to 40 days off per year. It's among the most liberal of the leave policies for any of the ABMS boards. This, of course, is still subject to your local institution, but from the point of view of the ABR, you can take up to 40 days off per year and still graduate on time with your class. And this applies to all of the disciplines in radiology. So I'd be glad to take questions about that a little later if you have any. We also increase the flexibility of the sequence of the qualifying computer-based exams. So basically you can decide in what order you want to take those. And I'll allow my colleagues to answer details about that, but that was just a new announcement late last year that allows individuals flexibility about when you take this. We really aren't overly concerned about the sequence, but ultimately you have to get through all of the portions of the qualifying exams in order to sit for the oral certification exam. Regarding that exam, we now have an additional opportunity for the certifying exam. There's the main event, which traditionally has occurred in the spring, will continue to occur in the spring. This is the calendar year following completion of training. This year it's in May. There's an additional event that has somewhat limited capacity because it's given in only one single day in October of this year. You can go to our website and find the details on this, but basically it's for people who have a life event and need to reschedule or know in advance. And a lot of this is related to childbirth or becoming a new parent in some way that basically, if you only had one opportunity, it's in May, and that was the time that you expect to have a new baby added to the family, well, then we can schedule that in October. We do have limited capacity, though. This is on a trial basis, but the idea is to introduce more flexibility, especially for life events of any kind, including childbirth. We are adding more communication channels, things like this town hall. Usually we've done these in response to an issue. For example, the residency leave issue from last year. What we are going to be doing moving forward is having them like this, where they're kind of open topic, and anybody can ask anything they want. We'll provide an update and then allow sort of open forum for questions. We also recently sent out a communications survey, and that survey is designed to have you share with us, how would you like us to communicate with you? In what way? With what frequency? That survey is still underway, so we're hopeful that people, if you haven't yet responded, please consider responding to that communication survey. It's more, like I say, just let us know how you want us to communicate with you so that we're not guessing, because otherwise we apply our own biases to this and we think we're doing the right thing, and the whole time, well, you wanted text, not email, or email, not text, or social media, etc. So these are the kinds of things we're looking at for 2022. With that, I'll thank you for your attention. I'll leave my email up there for just a moment. If you have any questions after today that come up, things you didn't think about during the session, you didn't get a chance to ask or get answered during the Q&A that's coming momentarily, please don't hesitate to send me an email, and I'll make sure that I get back to you. So with this, I will stop sharing and turn things back over to David. He's going to be distributing the questions. So stop here.
Thanks, Dr. Wagner. We don't have any questions submitted yet. Oh, there's one that just came in. So the question is, what areas of growth has the ABR identified for improving inclusivity and equity for exam candidates, physicians with disabilities? Is the ABR open to soliciting formal feedback from physicians with disabilities? Thank you. Brent, you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I had thought of it, I would have just lengthened the slide presentation by a couple of slides. We have a new DEI committee that just formed late last year, and it's looking at all facets of diversity, equity, and inclusion that might impact our candidates or diplomates, or even the staff at the ABR. So it's a far-reaching group. They've met several times already since, as I said, since October, I believe. And some of the recent topics that have come up have included things like making sure that as much as possible, we remove potential bias during the oral exam process. We have had training as part of the preparation for examiners to address and reflect on implicit biases that all of us carry, and just to make sure that as much as possible we mitigate that by calling attention to it for individuals to reflect on. Let's make sure that the candidate is being judged on their merits and not on, again, these biases that we bring based on age, gender, ethnicity, etc. And David, could you the last part of that question? There was another piece to this. What was the last?
Yes, sorry. It's is the ABR open to soliciting formal feedback from physicians with disabilities?
Yeah, so I'm glad. So that's the other thing. Actually, about a month ago, I asked our staff, because I've only been in this job about a year and a half. I said, have we ever surveyed the people who require accommodations under the ADA, and determined are we doing the right things? Are we accommodating them appropriately? And we have not, actually. So we don't have many requests for accommodations. We are going to do a survey of those people who ask for accommodations, and just to make sure, did we satisfy those needs? Did we address what needed to be addressed so that individuals who require those accommodations got adequate opportunities to make that request? We followed through on the request, and we were effective in that regard. The other question that comes out of that, incidentally, we separate out nursing mother accommodations from disability accommodations, and we're actually, the ABR is sort of being envied by other boards that still give their exams in exam centers, because even though in some ways that's more convenient, you don't have to worry about the hardware and software, etc. If you're a nursing mother, this is a big deal, because many of the test centers don't have a clean and private place to accommodate nursing mothers. And since you're under our scenario, you can take the exam in your apartment or home. We hope that that's sort of the ultimate accommodation. You control that environment. So I hope that answered that question.
Thanks, Dr. Wagner. Next question is the intent to continue offering an alternate oral exam date every year? And also, will that continue to be virtual?
The exams we expect will continue to be virtual indefinitely. We have proven that it works, I believe, works extremely well. No testing instrument is perfect, but I think it works very well. So there is no intention to go back to an in-person exam format for either the computer-based exams or the oral exams. And again, this assumes it continues to work. And thus far, we haven't had security issues, because those are the things we can't control, right? Is whether or not people figure out ways to circumvent whatever minor security processes we have. Then that kind of puts the whole thing at risk. But for now, we're not terribly worried about that. We just haven't seen that problem, and I don't believe we will. The second exam event that we're offering, I don't see a particular reason we would need to not do that, but I will admit every exam is a pilot. So the assumption is that, yes, that secondary exam will be a permanent part of our new offering moving forward. And having said that, it's not yet been tried. So I don't want to speak for, and Dr. Ng is on the call, as one of the trustees. I don't want to speak for the trustees who recruit the oral examiners and basically have to put together the exam. But I'm not really able to come up with a reason as to why we would abandon that, at least in the short term. Maybe there's a better solution. Maybe it's going to be 3 times a year. Maybe the test will be revised in a way that won't require this, but I anticipate we'll be able to continue that. And we have no particular plans to try it for a year and stop. I think instead we're going to give it a good, honest try and take it from there. But Dr. Ing, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first year that we are offering 2 exams, one in the spring and one in the fall. It is a little bit more work for our volunteers, especially for the category chairs, but, people are pretty motivated to make things, as, flexible and accommodating for our diplomates as possible. So the hope is that this will continue, it depends on how well things go this year, but the hope is to continue to offer this twice a year. I don't know if Paul's in the call, want to comment as well.
Yeah. Actually, I am, and I must apologize just to emphasize the fact that things can go wrong with computers. I have been unable to sign on, so I'm on my telephone. But just to emphasize 2 points. One, regarding the second exam, our long-range planning for examiners and for exam content is certainly to have the second administration. So that is absolutely our intent at this point. And regarding the disability accommodations, we've been doing that regularly for many, many years. And to the best of my knowledge, we've never had a circumstance where the accommodation didn't suit the needs. So we're very open to those issues.
Can I make
another follow-up question, Dr. Wagner, about the oral exam and the 2 available dates each year is, if one were to condition the oral exam in May, would there be an opportunity to take the exam in the fall?
Yes, the governor's position is if you're eligible for an exam, you can register for it. So it's the option to the individual who is conditioned if they want to take it then or if they want to wait. Remember, no exam opportunity is required. Individuals have 6 years of board eligibility and they can take exams. Once they've finished the 3 qualifying exams, they can sit for the certifying exam anytime they wish.
We mentioned that there was going to be limited availability for the October sitting. Do you need the candidates to declare at a certain time if they would prefer to take it in May versus October, or can that be made further down the line?
Dr. Wagner, do you want to comment on that? That's been
I can
an open question for us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We haven't yet decided that, but I'm glad you brought that up because, and the staff will have to forgive me because I've used this analogy already, is that if you were trying to book a flight and you had a choice between a 9 a.m. flight and a 3 p.m. flight, you decide. And if you commit to the 3 p.m. flight, then that means we have more seats on the 9 a.m. flight to allow people to examine. And the equivalent here would be the May exam versus the October exam for 2022. It turns out that trying to get that going from a software standpoint to allow people sort of this pick which exam you prefer probably won't be ready in 2022. And we're hopeful that in 2023 that the candidates who become eligible, the ones who graduate in 2022, will have exactly that option that you described. And that way we can predict how many examiners we need for each exam, which makes Dr. Wagner and Dr. Ing's job a lot easier because they can then predict, okay, we know we have this many people who actually prefer to come in the fall, and we have people who would prefer the spring. Having said that, there still would be some minor flexibility. It's just we can't guarantee the seat. So I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I proposed 6 months ago. It just turns out that you'd think it'd be easy. And like many things in the ABR, there are unintended consequences of a lot of these modifications that we'd like to do. I think we'll get there, and I think we'll get there probably in 2023.
Okay, great.
Switching gears a little bit, a question about the qualifying exam. Is the ABR working on consolidating the qualifying exam into a single exam? Dr. Wagner, you want to field that one?
Yeah, I think the issue there is what is meant by a single exam. We have said for years that if by a single exam, you mean 6 or 8 hours with a full clinical oncology exam, a full physics exam, and a full biology exam, we can do that at any time. I think that would be a cruel and unusual punishment. If the question is to have a single exam with 20 or 30% basic science, we have indicated that that's not our intent.
And I believe the person that entered the question initially, it just indicated an exam, or that might be a different question. Hold on, let me look through these.
No, I agree that would be the question as far as combining physics, bio, and clinical. So I think it was answered.
Okay, great. All right, next question is, what options are there for examinees who are unable to sit for an exam due to extreme circumstances? Dr. Wagner, you want to take that one?
Yeah, unfortunately, to develop the content that would be needed to offer, let's say, for example, a qualifying exam, pick anyone you want, the physics part, to be able to offer that, say, multiple times, or to offer it 6 weeks later for a candidate who had a health issue unexpectedly and couldn't sit for the exam, we run into security issues, and honestly, it's difficult to develop the content. We have over 1,000 volunteers. They work really hard to develop high quality content. The challenge is that unfortunately, it's in some ways it's a once and done. And once we give that exam, we can't just say, oh, we'll schedule you for 3 weeks from now because there was some unforeseen event. Unfortunately, what it means is that in almost all circumstances, it just means we have to then say you have to sit for the next exam, because developing unique content, this isn't like the SAT that's given multiple times a year, or the LSAT. This is it's difficult, and I know the effort that goes into this, and there are resources expended on it as well to develop unique, high quality content for each exam. We can't just say that, okay, we're going to give another exam. So the reason we only have it's a little easier actually in the oral exam, because we can kind of split it up and just hold content from one exam for another event. It's more difficult in the written exam, somewhat paradoxically, to be able to say that we can offer a second exam, let's say, every 6 months. And as yet, although we have gotten at the idea of trying to get there, I'd love to get there. I just don't think it's realistic right now, but not beyond the realm of consideration. Andrea, do you have comments? I mean, you certainly are involved in item writing and that kind of thing. So.
Sure, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so item writing, it is actually quite time consuming, not just generating the items, but multiple, committee Zoom calls to review the items, fine tune the items. And then, just to give you an example, a few weeks ago, we had, the exam assembly meeting, and it was basically 9 hours of pretty much with very little break on a Saturday, with dozens of volunteers participating, and we're always very mindful of volunteer burnout. So I think at this time, realistically, it's probably not going to be we probably will not be able to have the capacity to do more than one qualifying exam a year. Does that answer your questions? Or
Yeah, I think that the person that asked the question originally about extreme circumstances provided some additional information and said, I have been in cancer treatment off and on since 2014. It's difficult to predict being in adequate health on one day of the year. So I think that's this particular individual's real concern is just the variability of health from day to day.
Yeah, and I think we can make some accommodation in that regard. I think with perhaps not allowing a random selection, if you will, but at least we can allow some accommodation in that regard. So I would encourage this individual, if he or she has not already, contact us directly. Email me if you'd like at bwagner@theabr.org, and we'll take a look at that and see what we can do. That's a little different than somebody asking to come back in 3 months because they were tied up. But if we have a range of days, that's certainly something we can look at.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, just as as a recent resident and someone who's sort of gone through this process, that I think the ABR can seem a little bit far-reaching as far as reaching out and just communicating seamlessly like that. It can be intimidating, but I would encourage any resident or trainee Dr. Wagner is, he will respond to your emails, Dr. Ing, anybody. I'm happy to help if you need me to. So just feel like you can go to these people. They are here to help you. They want you to succeed. So I think especially when there are very special circumstances that there are options. So I don't want you to feel discouraged, because I know one exam, every year for 3 or 4 years is a lot to try and swallow when you're dealing with things like that. So
Dr. Campbell, as somebody in the midst of the process, are there any other, words of advice and wisdom that you might impart upon the attendees today?
yeah, I'm just hoping that with the changes that have been made, I think there's a lot more flexibility than there used to be. I fully acknowledge that this is a very long board certification process and more than most. We're not trying to hide that, but it is something that's possible. And hopefully with the changes that have been made, there's a little bit more flexibility for various life events and to sort of get board certification done on your own timeline. So again, the ABR is open to feedback. Arrow has a good relationship with the ABR as well, and there's representatives that work closely, like on this committee. That was how I initially got involved. So really, just nobody needs to sort of suffer or think they can't be helped, because there are a lot of people that are willing to help and try and make arrangements. So just give that feedback when the ABR puts out their surveys and that sort of thing. Provide your feedback, and changes are possible when there's, you can make them for the right reason. So they are open to that feedback.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question, I'll probably hand this off to Dr. Wallner. If one graduates, or Dr. Ing, I think probably either of you could answer. And if one graduates in June of 2022, would May 2023 be the earliest one can take the oral? Is October of 2022 a possibility?
No, May would be the earliest. It's the policy is the year following graduation.
Great. Other questions? It looks like we've kind of caught up with the questions that have been entered so far. Other comments from the panelists?
This is Paul Wallner again. Just one comment I would make about flexibility. Now that we've moved to the remote exams and away from Pearson VUE for the qualifying exams, Dr. Campbell alluded to the issue of flexibility. The dates for 2022 and going forward for 2023 are dates that Arrow has suggested. We were perfectly comfortable accommodating the Arrow request. So as she indicated, we're delighted to work with Arrow in that regard. And you're either welcome, as Dr. Wagner said, to contact me or him directly, or to work through your Arrow representatives if there are things that are problematic.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment.
I realize on the East Coast it's quitting time, so, or I hope for most of you it is. So we don't need to keep people.
We've got one that's just come in here, Brent.
Go ahead. Yep.
Do you think the current certification process is contributing to declining interest in the field? I'm not sure who wants to take a stab at that.
I can take that if you like. I think that has become an urban legend, and there has been a decline in the applications over a number of years going well back. The exams have basically not changed. So the fact that the ABR is being accused of in some way impairing applications, the ABR process has been made, if anything, a lot easier. I think if one reads the resident blogs, the issues related to job availability, some of the uncertainties about reimbursement have become the real problem issues. My own feeling is that the aiming barbs at the ABR process is creating a straw man for some of the real problems.
Yes, I would say that, to follow up on that, I personally don't believe that the board certification process has played a major role in that. I think it's multifactorial. People are making choices and decisions based on different things than they did before. Like I mentioned, we acknowledge the board certification process is fairly different than other board specialties. And, we acknowledge there was an issue, in 2018. I think the important thing to look at and consider is how far we've come, and focus on sort of the positive relationships we have now and I think that's had a really positive influence on the board certification process and being involved and looking to see how we can make improvements. I'm proud of, the feedback, how the ABR has handled the feedback that they've received. It hasn't been an easy process over the last couple of years. But I've seen a big change in how that feedback is taken and the changes that are made. So I've been very impressed with, everything is all virtual now. It's changed. So in a lot of ways, the ABR is ahead of many other specialties, despite there being, the separate certification exams. And again, remember, you've got to provide your feedback to Arrow, to the ABR, and we'll continue to move forward. Like the improvements don't finish, it's not done today. We're still improving. And every year there's a really positive change that comes from these discussions. So provide your feedback.
And I want to just add, as somebody who, went through board certification 20 plus years ago, I definitely had seen, significant improvement in the process, kind of how ABR has been so responsive to feedback, not just in terms of flexibility, more accommodations, but also the way the exam is delivered, the content is, much more practical, relevant. I think that, and it's only something that will continue to improve over time, and feedback from all of you will be very, very important.
Great. We've got another entry here. Starts with a comment. Thanks for putting this session together, followed by a question. Why does it take 6 weeks to get results for the qualifying exams? Brent, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm glad that question was asked. Actually, I have asked that same question myself for a dozen years, and we are attempting to improve on that and get that down closer to a month. And now you could ask, well, why does it even take that long? Because many of you have probably taken exams where they're scored instantly. And what we do is a more rigorous psychometric process than a lot of other computer-based exams might use. And it's an attempt to get to, and I'm going to quote my psychometrician staff, the highest level of fairness. And that entails actually dissecting out the items for individual performance on a given item, and then referring them back to the committees. And Andrea, you've probably been involved in this at some point, where the items that look problematic, they look suspect, because wait a minute, that I'll use a very specific example, that the correct answer actually was the second choice, meaning that maybe only 35% of people chose it, but 40% of people chose an incorrect answer. Well, is there something wrong with that item? Is it not performing well? And that analysis takes weeks to run. So our psychometric staff, they are extremely busy during that time, and they were in pursuit of, again, in their words, the highest level of fairness. And those delays actually mean more people pass ultimately, because it never goes the other way. We don't look at ways to, well, more than, we're not grading on a curve anyway, but we are looking to make sure that the items that we're scoring are psychometrically valid, that those are statistically valid items that, in the words of the psychometricians, perform well. And I am pushing the staff quite frequently. I don't know that we are actually still at 6 weeks. I thought we were closer to 4 weeks for our computer-based exams. And that's a huge improvement, because we used to say that it could be between 6 and 8 weeks. But we'll continue to work on that. I would love it, if we could get it down to 2 weeks. I know there's a lot of anxiety that goes with that interval, and we are constantly looking at what can we do to make it faster. But I can assure you, it's in your best interest that we take the time to analyze this as carefully as it's being analyzed.
Great. Another question has come in, actually a couple rolling in now. So the next one is, would clinical exam consider broadening the scope to include social determinants of health, financial toxicity, et cetera, may improve patient care if oncologists better understand these topics? Dr. Ng or Dr. Wagner?
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond to that. As we create an exam, when we build an exam, we build it based on a blueprint, and the blueprint includes X% of what we call non-clinical skills, which are items that are general bioethics, biostatistics, healthcare economics, diversity, inclusion, equity. We constantly update that non-clinical skills blueprint. The problem, of course, is that there are not a huge number of questions related to the non-clinical skills, but we will certainly look at adding questions related to global health, to equity, to some of those other issues. And again, if there are things that you think we're light on or that should be included, let us know.
I think that's a really great suggestion. I believe in the most recent, the newly formed DEI committee, that was discussed about adding, for example, health equity, as one of the non-clinical skill types of questions to be added to the exam.
Great, thanks. Next question is, when do we need to register for the rad bio and physics qualifying exam? And the secondary part of that is, when is payment due? And I can take that one. Actually, registration for that exam opens tomorrow for those individuals that are eligible. So you'll be receiving an email sometime tomorrow morning indicating that registration has opened. And the payment for that exam is due within 60 days of the actual exam date. So you can register before making the payment. Next question is, let's see here. Are you able to share what % of qualifying exam questions are experimental or are not intended for actual scoring?
David, I could try that one if you like.
Sure.
As far as I know, there is 0. I think that's an urban legend. We heard that in the diagnostic webinar last week, I guess the week before, last week, that we didn't host, but there were assertions made that were made with a high level of confidence that the ABR includes experimental questions that they don't intend to score. And I don't believe we have any anymore. I'm not sure it was ever done, but David, you might know as much about this as I do.
Yeah, those are traditionally called pretest items, and we do not use that kind of standard setting process for our exams. And it kind of goes back to the question about why does it take 4 weeks to score the exam? That's part of the reason, because we don't have pretest items. It's incumbent upon us to go through each individual item and evaluate the performance of each individual item on an exam for a particular exam event to make sure it's performing the way it needs to be performing, and take any needed steps to eliminate that particular item if it isn't performing the way we expect it to perform. Organizations that pre-test questions do that because they don't have to count those questions. So they actually, let's just use an easy example. The exam is only 100 questions, but you answer 120. And the reason you answer 120 is because they want to get statistics, performance statistics on those extra 20 items, so that they don't necessarily need to go through these extra processes when it comes to scoring. We just do it a little bit differently. So Dr. Wagner, you're absolutely correct. We do not have experimental items on forms because we don't do pre-testing in that fashion.
The reason that was important in the discussion last week, again, among a large diagnostic radiology audience, is that the assertion was made by someone who recently took our exam that just ignore those. If it seems like an off-the-wall question, it's probably an experimental question. Don't worry about it. And and that defies logic on two levels. One is if we were using experimental questions or pretest, as David called them, questions, they wouldn't look like they were off the wall. The whole point is they're supposed to be sort of normalized. But the second thing is we don't do that anyway. So I was able to tell that group that if answer the question, meaning don't assume, because they were encouraging the test takers kind of in an offhand way, don't worry about those because they don't count anyway. And I can assure you they count. We are doing that. Incidentally, that same discussion, the assertion was made that we claim we don't grade on a curve. And I was able to kind of offer, well, not only do we claim that, it actually happens to be true. We don't grade on a curve. So that's I don't know how much that enters into the test taker's mind, but no, we have a psychometric process that is widely used that does not require nor allow us to grade on the curve. We don't control the passing score. That's not even, we don't have a mechanism to even do that if we wanted to.
Great, thank you. We've still got about 5 minutes left. We have caught up on questions. Actually, it looks like another one just came in. How do you determine time allotment for qualifying exams? Would you consider allowing more time? Sometimes it's just a time crunch that creates the stress, which results in careless errors.
David, you and I together could probably answer that question. We actually take the approximate amount of time it takes the average person to answer the question, and we double that. Now, it just worked out that way. That's not the formula, but we allow a little more than a minute a question, and it actually takes most test takers just over 30 seconds to answer a question. And that buffer, if you want to call it that, is designed to say, well, some people take exams faster than others. Reasonably, there has to be an upper limit, and most people don't reach that level for our exams. It's not true universally, but for diagnostic radiology and radiation oncology, it's most people don't feel that time crunch because it fits within that sort of spectrum of how much time we allow candidates to take to get through the exam. David, do you have anything to add to that? I hope I got that correct.
Yeah, no, Dr. Wagner, you said everything I would have said, so nothing else to add to that.
Just one additional point on that. On the post-exam surveys that we do every year and that I review carefully, on a 5-point Likert scale, about 90% of the candidates indicated that they had plenty of time, more than enough or enough. A couple of years ago, we had some concerns in physics because we had increased the number of calculations. And we had some concerns about time. The following year, we reduced the number of calculations and increased the time. So we changed 2 variables at once, and we were back to everybody saying they had plenty of time. So at the moment, we don't seem to be short of time on any of the exams.
Great. Still a few more minutes, and there's another question that's come in, and that is there a way to make the grading process for the qualifying exams more transparent to minimize confusion? And I can take that one. I'm actually really glad it was asked. A couple of years ago, we started discussing this internally and with some of our advisory committees, the idea of just kind of laying out some of the things that Dr. Wagner mentioned earlier that go into the scoring processes, just for that very reason, to make it more transparent, so that there's a better understanding of all the individual steps that our psychometric and team and our committee members go through after the exam event is done, until the results are actually posted and made available. So we're actually, because of the pandemic and doubling up exams in 2021, we weren't able to roll that out. We just didn't have the staff resources to be able to do that with so many exams in such a short period of time. But this year, and actually the hope is for the RO qualifying exam, we will do that for the first time ever. And that what you will see on our website is, after the exam day is finished, an overall overview of what goes on in each step of the scoring process, and then we will actually show on the ABR website where we are in the scoring of a specific exam. So we kind of lay it out into like 6 individual steps from, the initial data gathering of the information, the answer strings from each individual examinee, to the processes of us uploading those into our database so that they can be displayed on the MyABR account. So we are actually going to be doing that, and look forward to being able to provide that additional transparency to not just the test takers, who are the ones that care about it the most for that specific event, but for anybody that's interested. So great question, and actually more to come, and more transparency on the way in the very, very near future.
Just one added note on that. We've actually done a number of publications on the scoring process, and if anyone wants to contact me, I'll be happy to get those citations to them. It's P. Wallner, PWALLNER, @theabr.org.
Thanks, Dr. Wallner. Another scoring question. Is it required that a certain percentage fail, or is it possible for a superstar cohort of examinees to all pass? Dr. Wagner, you want to take that one again?
Yeah, the most accurate way to say it is possible for an entire cohort to pass. There is no, that's what I was alluding to when I said it's not graded on a curve. When I was a resident some years ago, obviously, we were told authoritatively from our faculty that, they fail the bottom 20%. And with certainty, we were told this, and it was never true. The scoring model we use doesn't even have a way to do that. I mentioned that earlier. So the bottom line is we could have a cohort where everybody passes, or a very high percentage passes. It can go the other way, of course, too. We saw that a little bit a few years ago. But we don't even have in our minds really what that should be. We don't have a cutoff, and I hope that is reassuring, because it's not, you don't have to beat the bottom 20%. You just have to do the best you can do, and we'd be very comfortable if we had passing rates where everybody passed. We want you to succeed. We're not out. This is not a gotcha moment. We actually want people to pass the test, because I think it indicates, as I said earlier, a high level of training and achievement and knowledge. We're very comfortable with that philosophy, and if everybody passes, that's terrific. And for anybody on the call, I want to sincerely wish you luck in the exam, because I really believe that it's a difficult test. It means something when you pass it, and we would be very comfortable if when people pass the test, it doesn't bother us. It's a good thing.
I think just to note too, like in the last couple of years, our pass rates, have been like, we've had a lot of there's been a couple 99s, 98s, 97. So no, I don't have a 100 to tell you, but they're all quite high. So.
Yeah, if I can add perhaps in closing one last point about that, Dr. Gerdeman, our chief of psychometrics, and I have had long discussions about this, and he is so comfortable with the quality of each individual item that he would feel perfectly comfortable psychometrically if 100% passed.
Great, thank you. So we are at the top of the hour, the end of time. I want to be respectful of folks' time. I think Dr. Wagner alluded to it earlier. It is a little late on the East Coast. Any last words as we sign off from the panel?
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here.
All righty. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
Take care.
Thank you.